I'm smarter than you. Eat a bowl of poo-poo. You're dumber than me. Wash it down with pee-pee. Nya,
Brass wisdom here.
Wait, are you saying you're a 9/11 denier on top of everything else? Or... what? Huh? What? Wait. Or, no, wait. Is he saying 9/11 is correct? And then, but how does that analogy work?
Okay, I thought DA made the analogy clear. The use of the word shibboleth indicates the similarity between the two. They are both phrases held by distinctive groups of people. It is not saying they are equal claims of worth in what they are describing, but of what they are in general, aka a phrase.
The phrases, wow, just go poisoning the well and constructing that straw man already.
I feel that you don't know what a straw man or poisoning the well fallacy is. Here are some definitions taken off nizcore.org. Now, for one, he isn't misrepresenting New Atheist or even the dude used in the example, as that is what the dude's argument and that is what the New Atheists say. Evidence in of itself is subjective, and expecting DA to be a mind reader towards each and every atheist meaning of the term evidence is wholly unreasonable. Two, he was in no way trying to discredit everything atheists will say, and in fact, by offering the burden of proof to the atheists, he is giving them free reins to say what they want on it and to clear up their point. Having a discussion which puts your opponent in an awkward position isn't a fallacy in of itself.
But you shouldn't learn informal logic and find out how bad these arguments are, because then you wouldn't be able to use them. So just learn the arguments and learn how to defend them. Don't learn why they're wrong. That's very important in apologetics.
He said in order to defend against common objections. In order to do that, you have to at least know some basic informal logic, or else you wouldn't be able to defend them. Case in point, we even have atheist philosophers like Daniel Dennett who pretty much agree with the arguments like the Kalam. Of course, with that one, he says the universe caused itself, and the arguments are still discussed philosophically and taken seriously in the philosophy of academia, and so I think they are far from debunked. It merely seems like the arguments are debunked because atheists tend to take on faith a layman's critique on an argument and assume they are right, even though the objections are dog shit. Apologists like William Lane Craig have pretty much shown why all the objections atheists have come forward with are failures. And in case you don't know, if your objection is bad, the argument still holds and needs no revision. If you really want to impress me and convince me the arguments are debunked, write your objections in a peer-reviewed philosophical journal where you can be critiqued, or do a debate where you can be critiqued in it. Until then, I won't take you seriously.
This would be shifting of the burden of proof if we had the burden to bear, but we don't.
It's not shifting the burden of proof, as it's not about the existence of God, but of the evidence for God. There could be no evidence for God but still be a God, or there could be evidence for God and there not be a God, seeing how science only gives a high probability of something being true, and any evidence for God's existence could be turned over in the future. If you say there is no evidence for God, you are making a claim, whether you like it or not. The evidence of God isn't dependent on God's existence. By saying there is no evidence of God, you are making a claim to the evidence of God. The arguments are always stated to be probabilistic from almost all debates on it.
There's no localized evidence of God at any rate. There's no evidence of God around me at this moment. I can look around this room. I can go outside and look around. I could look into science and look for this thing called God, and I wouldn't find it.
Philosophical and scientific arguments such as the fine-tuning, Kalam, and digital physics would all be considered localized, as it is something we could test as they are in the realm of science.
Now you might want to say, well, but the creation is evidence of God. Well, that assumes that it's a creation, and no, it would be evidence of itself, nothing more. And
He wouldn't say that the universe itself is the evidence for God, as that would be a weak argument anyone could easily debunk. What he would likely argue is that the way the universe is set up lends more credibility to the God hypothesis. Arguments like the Kalam and fine-tuning are making an inference to how the universe works and what we can conclude from it.
it wouldn't be direct evidence of the phenomenon in question, which is what I'm saying, that there's no evidence of this particular phenomenon. Not things that point to it or suggest it or hint at it, but something that says, hey, look, here it is. If I say I have a baseball, I can hold up a baseball.
You're asking for proof of God, not evidence of God. There is a difference. Proof is conclusive while evidence is suggestive. To say I have proof you have a baseball in your hand is to say I can see your hand, the baseball, and see it in a gripping position. To say I have evidence that you had a baseball in your hand is to say I can run tests on the ball and come to the conclusion that it is probable that you had the baseball in your grips. To a second point, you seem to not know science or philosophy, so let me explain a bit. In science, you're allowed to suggest a possible new cause for something that is currently untestable for the time being if there are good reasons why that is needed and if our current range of causes don't work to solve it. For example, the multiverse. Theists seek through philosophy to show why, given this evidence, a new cause, aka God, should be given.
Yes, Mind Reading 101. He knows that you are determined to not believe. And he's telling people that the atheist is just determined to not believe.
He didn't say determined to not believe, but simply not to be convinced. There is a difference. The subject in question is the arguments, not the existence of God. While I could say I'm determined to believe in God, I could also be determined to not be convinced by the arguments for God because I want to believe without arguments.
It's not even worth arguing with them, really. If only we weren't told to tell people about God, it would just be so much simpler, wouldn't it? But our God was dumb enough to tell us to tell people about God, even though they're not going to believe us when we do that.
I believe you would be talking about Matthew 28, verses 18 through 20. Proselytization has always been more than just forcing information down your throat till you crumble about opening your heart to the evidence. In Christian theology, that is pretty much the case. If you're not open to the evidence or to being convinced, then it doesn't matter because you've closed yourself off. To give an example, try convincing a young earth creationist that the earth is old. The information is there, but the person closes them off to it. Now, I'm not a believer myself, but I can say Christians have done a decent job of getting the information out there.
Because every other religion that's out there pretty much is doing the same thing. And none of them have any evidence for their God. But ours is different because we do have evidence.
Not every other religion that is out there does that. Buddhists pretty much don't do it, nor do Jains. There are actually plenty of religions that don't do it. Also, Christianity in of itself relies on Jesus' resurrection, which could be argued with from history, which is a lot more than a lot of other religions have.
It doesn't matter. No matter what argument I throw at them, they'll just say it's been debunked. It has, by the way.
Seeing how you can't get something like a straw man fallacy or a poisoning of the well fallacy right, I highly doubt you can mount a clear debunking of any argument.
Arguments are not evidence, so where's the evidence? Oh, but
the whole arguments is not evidence slogan. I swear atheists who use this need to be forced to take a philosophy class for a semester. Let me say this good for you. Arguments contain the evidence, or at least an inference to the evidence. Let me give you an example. The existence of math, numbers, and order makes this statement true, and all the numbers used match what we already accept as true, and it logically works out. 4 being greater than 2 is evidence that 8 is greater than 2. Once you agree to the premises, the third logically follows. These types of arguments are about the inferences of something, which when you put them together and make a logical argument, you come to a conclusion. To say argument is not evidence is like saying a case of beer is not a beer can. Well, technically true, a case of beer itself contains the beer can.
Yes, there is no evidence of God. So what? And big deal. That's why we have faith. Your construct, straw man, and continual shifting the burden of proof is getting annoying.
You keep using the words straw man and burden of proof. I think these words mean different than what you think they are. For one, it was an example meant to display a hypothetical situation and theists might have it with an atheist. Having the atheist saying there is no evidence of God is not misrepresenting the atheist statement or their position, as that is word for word what they say. Now, do atheists mean different things by that? Yes, but as stated before, expecting someone to be a mind reader on what all atheists mean by evidence is unreasonable. Secondly, it's not shifting the burden of proof. What he is stating is that the atheists that say that statement are making a claim, but not on God's existence, but on the evidence of God's existence, which as I have explained before, is different.
Of the word supernatural, which, according to most of theists, is what God is. God is supernatural. Now, if you don't have a supernatural God, then by default you must therefore have a natural God. And if you have a natural God, then there should be ample empirical evidence of it and repeated tests that we can run on it. And all you need to do is supply either of those, and I will agree with you that that God exists.
You have way too much confidence in science. We're still trying to learn dark matter, aka said to be one of the most common things in the universe, and said by some to not even exist. It would be perfectly feasible for a natural God, which would, I think we agree, be more complicated than a black hole, dark matter, etc., to remain undetected and for us not to have ample evidence of. Also, there are ways to test the supernatural, for example, through the philosophical arguments, or hell, even through scientific reasoning, as if it was shown that there was a phenomenon that nature as we know it could not explain. It would be fair game to postulate possible new causes if need be. If a God happens to fit the bill better than the natural, then we can say there that there is a supernatural thing that explains the evidence better.
The natural world cannot observe the supernatural world, at least not in ways that can be verified to be anything other than your brain doing stuff.
For one, you're arguing against supernatural experiences, which is not even the arguments DA brought up, and there are arguments that don't rely on our experience. The fine-tuning, contingency, and Kalam aren't dependent on our experience, and whether or not we notice them, they would apply. Now, for the sake of argument, let's just imagine that DA did use supernatural experiences as evidence. Technically speaking, we could still know what would be more likely to be supernatural depending on the effect given. Drugs might make a person say some weird things like a supernatural experience would, but a supernatural experience would likely have that plus things like fulfilling prophecies and other distinguishable traits. Also, the fact a scientist can make you experience anything should make you doubt a world outside your mind. If a person could be fooled into thinking they had a supernatural experience by a scientist, then what is stopping a scientist in the future with a much better knowledge of the brain to fool the person into thinking that their experience of the outside world is real? Also, since this is a natural phenomenon, what is stopping this from actually happening inside the brain naturally? Your arguments against supernatural experience could lead you into solipsism.
Oh yeah, we just don't understand these big sophisticated ideas. That's the problem, and it's just obviously true of every atheist everywhere that they just don't understand these things.
I can admit that DA was creating a straw man here by using atheist as an all atheist and not just some atheists, which would be a much more fair statement. I would personally be more willing to let the comment go, since the use of the word short circuit seems to deem he was being hyperbolic. And this isn't a literal statement, but I could see the issue in that phrasing.
But I do understand a universal negative and why it's not possible to prove or disprove a universal negative. It's not a thing that can be done.
A virgin slut, a married bachelor, a squared circle, a triangle with 4 sides. There, just did. Those can't exist in the universe. I just did the impossible.
But of course, the last thing that you would want to do is encourage actual conversation with people. Debate is great when you understand the logic, how it works, how debates work, and what their purpose is.
For one, you accuse DA of not encouraging actual conversations, but I have 2 objections to that. Even if we take DA completely serious, you have no good evidence of that claim, so I assume by your definition of faith, you're taking your claim on it, and you're making a hasty generalization fallacy. DA is friends with the Escaping Atheism Project, which is known to have open conversations with just about anyone of any background as long as they are rational and not dogmatic. DA himself has even wanted to go on an atheist podcast in order to discuss things, so your claims are BS. For the most part, I believe debates are good, although I do object that nowadays it's more about entertaining than informing. Debates in and of themselves have purposes of multiple varieties, such as to inform, entertain, win people over, etc. With multiple topics such as religion or politics, there is no single purpose, reason, or topic to debate on.
We didn't get offered any evidence at all in your video. There's none ever mentioned. Not once. Nothing is given.
The video was not about the existence of God, but rather the atheist statements on the evidence of God. Also, he did bring on philosophical evidence, which even if you think is debunked, you can't say he didn't include it. In conclusion, there was multiple problems I found in this video response, and I think I've given ample reason why we should continue to be skeptical of people who call themselves skeptics. Well, that is all for today. This is Mr. Brass of Brass Wisdom saying goodbye and get wise.